Pursuant to Rule 7A, and with the concurrence of the ranking member, the committee will come to order. I want to welcome our colleagues to the HASC Member Day. Thank you for taking time to be here with us today. We look forward to hearing from you all on your priorities for the fiscal year 2026 National Defense Authorization Act. In addition to the testimony provided today, several members have submitted statements for the record. I ask unanimous consent that all members' written statements be made part of the record without objection, so ordered. The committee will recognize members to give statements one at a time in the order in which they arrived. We will limit testimony to 4 minutes today, but we will enter your full remarks into the record. Thank you for being here, and I want to yield to the ranking member for any opening statement he may have.
Just quickly, it's great to have members from outside the committee here, as the chairman and I always do. It's a big bill, a lot of policy in it. We want to make sure we reflect the entire Congress, not just those on the Armed Services Committee. So I appreciate you being here, and look forward to hearing your testimony. I yield back.
Thank the ranking member. Our first witness today is Ms. Kaptur from Ohio. You're recognized. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Smith, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before your committee today. I wish to address 3 issues for which I seek inclusion as your committee develops the FY26 Defense Authorizing Bill. First of all, to expand congressional engagement in maintaining our transatlantic relationships and security commitments to NATO, Central Europe, and Ukraine. Second, to improve the health benefits provided to Gold Star spouses and children. Third, to afford proper and equal VA and DoD health benefits to Guard and Reserve members who were wounded in combat, but are treated differently for long-term eligibility for injury and illness treatments, such as PTSD. And fourthly, to strike a new service medal entitled Last Service Member Standing. Let me briefly describe each. First, for at least 76 years, the nations represented by NATO have worked together in mutual self-interest for liberty and security under the umbrella of the strongest alliance for liberty in history, NATO. However, as we speak, the ever-expanding spiderweb of tyranny, including Vladimir Putin's Russian dictatorship with North Korea, Iran, prey again on the people of Ukraine and encroach on other adjacent nations that seek to be free. The fight for liberty is a global effort, and it requires a global response. For our part, Ohioans, like other parts of our country, care deeply about liberty. We know liberty's cost. We know its worth. And just like you, we stand in unwavering support of freedom's cause. And that is why I call upon this committee to consider requiring, through legislation, early notice mandates to Congress should any administration seek to withdraw U.S. troops below the levels necessary to deter Russian aggression against our allies. And 2, consider making clear that in negotiating a ceasefire with Ukraine, we will not cede to Russian demands. Putin must be held accountable for the crimes of aggression and theft of thousands of children he has committed against the people of Ukraine. The kidnapping of tens of thousands of Ukrainian children already has been deemed a war crime by the International Criminal Court. In addition, Ukraine, through our NATO alliance, must continue to provide the weapons and materiel needed to push Russia back inside its own borders. Number 2, a second request I place before your committee involves my legislation, the Gold Star Spouse Healthcare Enhancement Act. This bill will allow surviving spouses and minor children who meet the criteria for a Gold Star lapel button to maintain TRICARE, Prime or TRICARE Select coverage as active duty family members for as long as they retain eligibility for TRICARE coverage. The debt our nation owes to the brave men and women who make the ultimate sacrifice while serving overseas is not a debt that can be paid within 3 years. It is our sacred responsibility to honor their sacrifice by caring for their surviving spouses and minor-aged children. My third request involves a gap in current long-term military health system coverage related to surviving combat veterans who served in the Reserve or Guard. I met with such a group again just 2 weeks ago, and it is my understanding that eligibility for longer-term health care services can expire despite a veteran's having endured major combat wounds. and a lifelong need, for example, for serious PTSD intervention that remains raging and debilitating. My fourth and final request involves a new medal. I seek your committee's authorization through the Department of Defense to perform necessary research and create criteria including character, circumstance, nature of the battle, war wounds, and medical records to define, strike, and administer the award of a new category of service medal acknowledging the heroism and exceptional valor of our last service member standing. One more paragraph. Presently, the Department of Defense only processes medals for soldiers who served in battle if there are 2 living witnesses that can verify their service. For soldiers who served in horrific battle, with all unit soldiers dead, but 1 remaining alive and critically wounded yet standing ground, the current regulations simply make no sense. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Smith, for the opportunity to speak today to your committee and present these vital suggestions. I look forward to working with you and your staff to develop these proposals and move them across the finish line. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Ms. Kaptur. Those very thoughtful suggestions. Ms. Randall, you're recognized.
Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Smith, thank you for the opportunity to share my priorities for the FY26 National Defense Authorization Act. My district is home to Puget Sound Naval Shipyard and Intermediate Maintenance Facility, Army Reserve Center in Tacoma, as well as Naval Base Kitsap and Naval Hospital Bremerton. More than 15,000 active duty service members, reservists, and their families call Washington's 6th District home. In the Washington State Legislature, I had the opportunity to lead the creation of a law to strengthen transition support for military-connected students, ensuring they could more easily enroll, transfer credits, and access services after a PCS move. I'll soon be introducing the bipartisan Assuring Navigation of Compact Help for Ongoing Relocations, or ANCHOR for Military Families Act, and urge you to include the bill in the NDAA. Military families, especially those with children in special ed or the Exceptional Family Members Program, face significant challenges during permanent change of station moves. Although all 50 states and Washington, D.C. have adopted the Military Interstate Children's Compact Commission, many families still don't know their rights. My bill would require the Department of Defense to provide standardized, accessible relocation guidance using existing platforms at least 45 days before a PCS, and we've gotten good feedback from DoD on this policy. This will ensure that families are better prepared and supported before arriving at their new duty stations. I also urge this committee to increase authorization for the Defense Community Infrastructure Program, or DCIP. As you know, this program supports off-base infrastructure that is vital to readiness and quality of life, such as water systems, schools, and emergency services. Demand remains really high. In FY24, only 14 DCIP projects were funded, with the currently authorized $100 million, underscoring the urgent need for expanded support to meet growing infrastructure needs. In my community, there's a particular need for increased support for multimodal projects so that students can get to school alongside the workers headed to base. Those two things don't have to be in contrast with each other. We can ensure that our infrastructure works for all families around our bases. Increasing the authorization for DCIP would strengthen the connection between military installations and the communities that support them. My district is also home to companies like Safe Boats International, who exemplify how employee ownership drives workforce stability and delivers exceptional value to the DoD. I appreciate the committee's FY22 NDAA language to support contracting with companies that are wholly owned by employee stock ownership plans or ESOPs, and I would like to work with the committee on ways to further strengthen this language to support businesses like Safe Boats. Lastly, I want to express my concerns about the continued reductions in services at military treatment facilities and hospitals. In my district, obstetric care and inpatient mental health services have been removed from our local naval hospital, forcing families to travel for routine and specialized care. And while a map might say that we're only 14 miles from another facility, in my district that means taking a ferry to Seattle, which is not always easy for families. They've already had to make the difficult decision at Naval Base, or the Naval Hospital, to close their ER and labor and delivery unit, and will soon lose their last remaining OBGYN. This shift places additional strain on civilian providers and delays access for military families who already face complex health challenges. We must reverse this trend and restore core services at military treatment facilities, especially in regions with large military populations. Thank you again for the opportunity to share these priorities. I appreciate the committee's effort and the staff who make this work possible. My team and I are ready to assist in any way we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Randall. Did you put in there a recommended authorization level for DSIP? You said you wanted it to be raised. Did you say how much?
Congresswoman Strickland has the recommendation for the level. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Ms. Glusenkamp-Perez, you're recognized.
Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Smith, it's good to be with you today. Thank you for making time to hear from us about our communities and our interests here. One thing I'd like to raise today is military right to repair legislation. When our service members are required to be on hold with a manufacturer, ship parts overseas for simple repairs, when they have to fly an authorized contractor out to work on their equipment, it's not just costly and demoralizing, candidly, to the technician. It also deprives them of the skill to go out into the workforce and build that asset nationally. This is a long-term cost, not just to our military readiness, but also to our embodied skill set in this nation. And so I would love to have your support in the Service Member Right to Repair Act that requires manufacturers to provide the Defense Department with fair and reasonable access to repair materials. Last month, the Trump administration announced that the Army would be prioritizing right to repair provisions in its contract. This is very welcome news, and I hope that other branches of the armed services follow suit. There's actually a report recently in the PIRG about a military right to repair, and a statistical study 7 out of 8 Americans support military right to repair. I don't know what's up with the other 1%, but this is a broadly held sentiment that this is something that we should be doing as a nation. It's my hope that my committee can build on this bipartisan momentum in this year's National Defense Authorization Act by including my Service Member Right to Repair Act in base text. By prioritizing repair and defense contracts, we can save our tax dollars that we work so hard to build. Thank you so much for your leadership on this committee. Thank you for your continued support for Ukraine. Our community has suffered greatly. They have suffered bitterly as a nation, advancing the values that we share in this nation. So thank you so much for your work. Look forward to working with you.
Thank you, and I fully not only support Ukraine, but I fully support the right to repair legislation, and I'm hopeful that it will be done this year. All right, Ms. Stansbury, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With your permission, I know Representative Schrier is under a time crunch. Can I punt to her first? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. Thank you, Ranking Member Smith. Thank you, Representative Stansbury. I treasure the opportunity to be able to testify before you here today. Passing the National Defense Authorization Act each year is some of the most important work we do in Congress. The bill authorizes funding for the Department of Defense to enhance our national security and provide for our service members and their families. I'm honored to represent many of those service members and their families who are stationed at Joint Base Lewis-McChord. Washington State has a very high cost of living, and that's especially true for our service members. They and their families already make so many sacrifices to serve their country, and it's only right that we take care of them. I was proud to vote for the FY25 NDAA, which included a significant pay raise for junior enlisted members, expanded child care fee assistance, and recognized the importance of child care workers on base. But there's still so much work to be done. Housing and child care continue to be particularly difficult expenses for many military families. Outside military bases like JBLM, raising the basic allowance on housing actually leads to landlords increasing their rents by the exact same amount, leaving service members really with no benefit. Service members based out of Seattle were previously eligible for a cost of living adjustment, but this was reversed in the most recent announcement of COLA-eligible locations for 2025. COLA gives service members more power than a simple housing allowance increase, whether in Seattle or elsewhere in Washington state. Service members deserve fair compensation. Many of their civilian defense colleagues receive locality pay to address rising costs in the area, and this should be no different for service members. They also desperately need more affordable and accessible childcare options. In Washington, pay for childcare workers on base is not close to on par with the pay they can receive elsewhere. And so when a childcare worker has to decide where to work, it is probably not going to be the military pay. So increasing pay for childcare workers at military-operated childcare centers is a critical step to ensuring childcare is provided. Continued investments in childcare fee assistance are also incredibly important for those who don't utilize or can't utilize military-operated childcare centers. Some families live up to an hour away from base, and so it is not feasible to travel that distance back and forth for childcare. And this is especially true for military spouses who already face other challenges. They should have the ability to choose which child care services support their family the best, whether that be on base or closer to home. We also need to ensure states have the information available to fully understand the extent of child care needs. Demographic and child care fee assistance utilization data is currently offered only at the state level. We need that at the zip code level to reflect what's going on with our military. Lastly, and I'm speaking as a physician here, I was extremely disappointed to see significant cuts to the congressionally directed medical research program in the full year continuing resolution. CDMRP is a catalyst for groundbreaking innovations in healthcare, but the program was only funded at $650 million in fiscal year 25. That is a 57% cut. This resulted in more than 20 programs being cut, included research for spinal cord injuries, cancer, HIV, AIDS, and epilepsy, and we need to do better here in the United States of America. Research here impacts people around the globe. We need to remain the leader in research around the world, and I hope that you will reverse these cuts and enhance research in the 26 NDAA. Thank you. I yield back.
Did the authorizers cut that, or did the appropriators cut it? Do you know?
I believe that was just in the CR.
So it was the appropriators. I just don't remember us cutting that in the authorization bill. We may have, but if you could have your staff let me know. And I also wanted to say I appreciate your continued focus on child care, not only the wage for the workers, but the reimbursements. As you know, that was the big thrust of last year's bill. And I don't know that those changes have had time to make their way, but I appreciate the fact you're staying on top of that. I hope you will continue to give us feedback about what you're hearing about any shortcomings that may still exist after the new relief that we've just funded and authorized percolates into those systems.
Thank you. I really appreciate it, and they do too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Ms. Stansbury, you ready?
Yes.
You're up.
All right. Well, good morning. Thank you, Chairman Rogers. Thank you to our ranking member Smith. I'm delighted and honored to be here today in front of the Committee on Armed Services to testify on the fiscal year 2026 National Defense Authorization Act. I represent New Mexico's 1st Congressional District, and that includes Kirtland Air Force Base and Sandia National Labs. And as you know, this is integral to our national nuclear security apparatus. I want to start by saying thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, for your tremendous leadership this last NDAA for the pay raise for our active duty service members, especially in a base that is expanding and a population in Albuquerque that is heavily service member families. It was long overdue, so thank you for your leadership. I'm here today to testify on 2 main priorities for Albuquerque and for Kirtland Air Force Base and our communities, and which your staff have been a tremendous support in the last NDAA in helping us to get report language to help hold the Department of Defense accountable and continuing to work with our communities. The first has to do with unexploded ordnance and demining at Sandia National Labs and the Kirtland Air Force Base and the adjacent tribal lands. Dating back to the Manhattan Project in World War II, there has been years and years of testing of both nuclear and other materials on the base and adjacent lands. And unfortunately, the tribe who's directly south of the base lands for many years was subjected to having their lands utilized for testing of munitions. Increasingly, especially as weather events have exposed those munitions, they do pose a direct risk to our tribal community. And so our ask is to include language once again, to ask the Department of Defense to coordinate with the Department of Energy, because it also falls under the National Nuclear Security Administration, and with our tribes to coordinate the removal of those materials. We're also looking for continued funding for NALIMP, which is the program the Army Corps uses to contract and work with tribes to remove those materials. So we look forward to hopefully having the opportunity to work with you on that. The second is that for the last 26 years, we've had a jet fuel leak on Kirtland Air Force Base, and unfortunately, due to the slow pace with which the cleanup is happening, it is threatening the groundwater aquifer, which is the drinking water for the city of Albuquerque. We have been asked by the state and our city and county, as well as our utility, to try to get an accelerated timeline, working with Department of Defense and the Air Force to get that jet plume cleaned up, because it is directly threatening the water supply for our city, which of course affects 1 million people, but it also affects the readiness of the base itself, because our families live in town and drink that water as well. So I very much appreciate the opportunity to be able to testify here today, and really, truly do thank you for your leadership. And with that, I yield back.
Have you made a direct inquiry of the service about that remediation and its speed, and have they replied to you?
Absolutely. We are in constant contact with the commander of the base, but there have been ongoing challenges, shall we say, with the cleanup, and I can get into more details, but I know we don't have sufficient time here. You know, the mission of Kirtland Air Force Base is primarily a nuclear mission, and so our commanders necessarily are often focused on the mission of national security, and so other important activities that need to happen are not happening oftentimes at the pace they need to.
Okay, thank you for bringing that to our attention. All right, and now Budzinski.
You got it, Chairman.
All right, you're up.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers and Ranking Member Smith. I appreciate this opportunity to provide testimony before the House Armed Services Committee as a part of the fiscal year 2026 National Defense Authorization Act Member Day. I am here before you again this year to advocate for the inclusion of a policy that would stimulate domestic manufacturing, create new jobs, and protect the health and safety of our military service members. The bipartisan Boots Act would ensure that all optional combat boots available to our military personnel are Berry Amendment compliant, meaning that they are made in the United States and sourced with American materials. Right now, the DoD regulations permit soldiers to purchase foreign-made boots that mimic the appearance of regulation boots, but fall far short in quality and durability. Not only does this leave our troops vulnerable to injury, it also undermines our defense supply chain. These concerns are underscored in the 2024 Camoland Clothing and Textile Industrial Base War Game Report commissioned by the DoD's Defense Logistics Agency. The report warns that in the event of a major conflict, the current clothing and textile supply chain would be too fragile to meet demand. Among its recommendations is that military exchanges stock only Berry-compliant uniform items, including boots, citing a troubling increase in reliance on foreign-made footwear, a critical vulnerability in our supply chain. The Boots Act addressing this issue passed the House in last year's NDAA, but was ultimately stripped in conference negotiations. However, the final bill did include language directing DoD to report to Congress on the feasibility of requiring Berry Amendment compliant boots. In its response, DoD acknowledged that continued reliance on foreign-made boots risks further weakening of our domestic footwear industrial base and job market. The report also raised repeated concerns about quality, as foreign-made boots may not meet the same quality standards as domestic-made boots, potentially compromising, again, the safety and well-being of our service members. Lastly, select branches noted that requiring Berry Amendment boots could support domestic job creation and stimulate investments in U.S. footwear manufacturing infrastructure. That is why we must include the Boots Act again in the NDAA this year. This bipartisan policy aligns with President Trump's stated commitment to revitalizing American manufacturing and bringing jobs back home. By including this provision in the NDAA, we can protect our troops with higher quality equipment, strengthen our industrial base, and reduce dependence on foreign supply chains. I thank Congressman Bost for his partnership on this important provision, and I ask that the committee support inclusion and passage again of the Boots Act in this year's National Defense Authorization Act. I want to thank you again for this opportunity to testify, and I look forward to working together on this important issue. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, and I appreciate you staying after it.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Escobar, you're up.
Good morning, Chairman Rogers and Ranking Member Smith. I miss serving on the House Armed Services Committee so much that I'm here today to testify before you on Member Day. I want to thank you both for your leadership. I so appreciate the bipartisan process in crafting the NDAA every year, and I'm here to offer my own recommendations since I cannot do it as a member of the Armed Services Committee. As you both know, I have the incredible privilege of representing Fort Bliss, and as the representative for Fort Bliss, I'd like to highlight some of the concerns that I have, which I've shared with you all before, so none of this is new. One of my primary concerns is regarding this administration's unprecedented use of DoD assets for operations that traditionally fall under the jurisdiction of the Department of Homeland Security. In recent months, we've seen this administration use military airlift to deport migrants out of Fort Bliss, an absurdly expensive operation to set up a migrant detention camp at Guantanamo Bay, and a plan to establish migrant detention camps on military installations around the country. DHS has requested these DoD support operations be provided on a non-reimbursable basis, which is egregious, as funds appropriated to DoD should be used to provide for our service members and focus on global threats, not misuse assets and resources when more cost-effective alternatives are available. As we near the start of construction of a migrant detention facility on Fort Bliss, the first installation subjected to such plans thus far, I would like to iterate my opposition to this misuse of our military bases. The last time Fort Bliss was required to build and support a holding facility, it was part of Operation Allies Welcome, when a large facility was built to hold over 10,000 Afghan refugees that the U.S. evacuated and processed in coordination with DHS. That mission alone set Fort Bliss back on readiness levels by approximately 2 years. I remain deeply worried that allowing migrant detention facilities onto our military bases and directing surges of troops along the border will have similar effects on our readiness at a time when we cannot afford to do so. I would also like to add that such operations also jeopardize civil-military relations in communities like my hometown of El Paso, where we are so proud of Fort Bliss, our soldiers, and their families. At a time when border crossings are at historic lows, constituents in my district have few answers as to why strikers, armored fighting vehicles, are patrolling our community, carrying DHS personnel who have patrol vehicles of their own. I think it's important to note that in President Trump's first term, his own secretaries of defense opposed using the military for federal law enforcement matters, as they revered our military as an institution and understood that involvement of our armed forces in domestic political matters set a dangerous precedent both for our military and our communities at home. I have a number of other requests, but as I'm running out of time, I will make sure to submit those to you all. I also look forward to working closely with you as I serve on the MilCon VA subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee, and would like to ensure that the work we did last Congress under the Quality of Life panel, that we fulfill that promise through our appropriations as well as through the authorization process. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ranking Member, I yield back.
Great, glad to have you back here where you belong, but I'm also glad to have you as an appropriator to make sure the things that we authorize get funded, so welcome.
Thank you.
All right, next we have Mr. Gonzalez of Texas.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers and Ranking Member Smith, for holding today's member hearing. As you prepare the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal 2026, we appreciate the opportunity to speak before this committee. I have a couple of pressing infrastructure issues on NAS Kingsville in my district in Texas 34, a new pass and tag facility and a fire station training facility located in the 34th Congressional District in South Texas. NAS Kingsville plays a critical role in training the next generation of Navy and Marine Corps aviators. It's been doing so since it's opened its doors in 1942. Today, NAS Kingsville is home to training Air Wing 2 and trains nearly 50% of Navy and Marine Corps tactical jet pilots every year. Last year, I was incredibly excited to bring former Secretary of the Navy, Carlos Del Toro, to tour NAS Kingsville and discuss ongoing efforts to improve the well-being of the base and its personnel. NAS Kingsville is not only a premier location for jet and strike aviation training, but also plays a vital role in the region's local economy. The installation is economically important as it employs over 4,000 employees, including over 1,800 active duty military personnel. It also contributes at least $1 billion to the Texas economy. As you can see, NAS Kingsville plays a crucial role not only to my district, but to the nation. And that is why we must act quickly to address these long overdue infrastructure issues. The installation's current pass and tag facility is located 1.3 miles beyond the south entry control point, which requiring gate security personnel to escort visitors and contractors over a mile into the installation before they can obtain their credentials. This poses a significant security risk for NAS Kingsville. It delays vehicle entry into the base and places an additional burden on base security personnel. Then there's the issue of NAS Kingsville Fire Station, which was built in 1956, almost 75 years ago, almost 80 years ago, and it's in desperate need of renovation or replacement. The facility is too small to accommodate modern firefighting equipment and is plagued by a variety of issues, including leaky roofs, mold, ineffective climate control. In case I need to remind you, it's really hot in South Texas, and we can really use some help there. NAS Kingsville is requesting funding to renovate and expand the fire station to both accommodate modern firefighting equipment apparatus, train NASC firefighters, and increase quality of life for on-duty fire first responders. For years now, NAS Kingsville Command has requested funding to complete the new pass and tag facility and fire station training facility. However, they've been unsuccessful as DoD requires projects to be included in future years' defense programs or unfunded priority lists to be eligible for funding. Last year, we introduced 2 amendments for FY25 NDAA highlighting the importance of these 2 projects for NAS Kingsville, but they were not made in order. I urge you and your colleagues to consider including similar language in this year's NDAA. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. Mr. Yakym, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers and Ranking Member Smith, for holding this hearing today. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be before this committee and share some really important things to the Hoosier State. My district is the proud home of AM General, which has been manufacturing Humvees for our military for the past 40 years. They have strived to consistently innovate and make Humvees safer, effective, and more reliable for our warfighters. As a result, the Humvee has served on countless missions at home and abroad. Currently, the National Guard is deploying Humvees in their mission to secure the southern border. In addition to Humvees, AM General also committed to investing over $380 million in a new facility to manufacture Joint Light Tactical Vehicles A2 variant, or JLTV A2. The JLTV A2 has a greater payload, blast protection, and arming capability due to its weight and size relative to the Humvee. The JLTV A2 is now in production in a state-of-the-art manufacturing facility that features more than 250 enhancements to the original JLTV, which provides greater mobility, reliability, and technological capabilities. In April, Army Secretary Dan Driscoll announced a new modernization plan for the Army, which included eliminating the Humvee and JLTV. I fully understand and support the need to evaluate defense spending in order to adequately prepare for the future warfare. However, this announcement was disappointing news for Indiana. AM General alone proudly employs more than 1,100 hardworking Americans across their Midwest facilities. The broader light tactical vehicle, or LTV, industrial base stretches across 43 states and over 1,100 supplier businesses. My staff and I have been actively engaging with Secretary Driscoll, the administration, state and local officials, and AM General to understand the modernization strategy and the implementation process. Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Smith, I ask that you, as you engage with the Department of Defense, you work to gain more information on the implementation and timeline of the Army's modernization plans. I'm happy to partner with you throughout this process and provide you with any information that you may need as these discussions continue. I know AM General can play a strong role in equipping our warfighters for decades to come. So I ask that you keep them at the table as discussions around the future of the Humvee and JLTV continue. Thank you again for this opportunity to testify. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank you, Mr. Yakym, and we will do just that.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Stauber, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers and Ranking Member Smith, for this opportunity to testify before you this morning. As you finalize the fiscal year 2026 National Defense Appropriations Act, I urge you to prioritize authorizing the procurement of the next generation manned fighters and the recapitalization of active duty, reserve, and Air National Guard units by including the Fighter Force Preservation and Recapitalization Act in this year's bill. Unfortunately, these are dangerous times, wars waging in Europe and the Middle East, while communist China continues to threaten stability and peace in Indonesia and the Pacific. Thus, we must do all we can to deter the expansion of conflict and, if necessary, meet these threats with overwhelming force. However, the Air Force has decreased fighter capacity at a 2-to-1 divestment procurement ratio since 2022. This accounts for 303 fighters divested and 155 new fighters procured in that same time frame. Since 1991, total Air Force fighter squadrons have been reduced by 58%, while the average age of the fighter inventory has increased 200%. 51% of the Air Force's service retained fighting force is in the Air National Guard. Most of the Air National Guard's fighter wings do not have recapitalization plans, and this trend must be reversed. The Air National Guard protects our nation from foreign threats both at home and abroad. They are simultaneously out frontline and the last line of our defense. These brave men and women are dedicated patriots and the best of the best. I would know my wife was the first female command chief of Duluth's 148th Fighter Wing in Duluth, Minnesota, the most deserving home for the next generation manned fighters in the Air National Guard. The 148th Fighter Wing was the only fighter wing that kept on flying during COVID. They never stopped. Without the procurement of the new aircraft, fighter wings will lose their mission and our nation will be less safe without them. In the case of the 148th Fighter Wing, we will lose the closest fighter wing to Russia in the lower 48 and the best airspace in the United States of America. North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, Wisconsin, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan is the airspace that they train in, the best in our nation. Most concerningly, we will lose the healthiest, most prepared, and most effective Air National Guard fighter wing in this nation, and many others like it. We would be without significant defense assets and more vulnerable than ever, but this is avoidable. By authorizing the procurement of new aircraft, we will extend the life of these crucial installations and their paramount missions of our national and state defense. Further, we will be ready in the event of crisis should one arise. Given the age of our fleet and the geopolitical landscape of today, the time to act is now. We are asking our fighter units, our Air National Guard units, to do more than they ever have. We should give them the best of the best. In closing, I would like to thank both of you again for allowing me to testify before your committee today. And I am confident that you will deliver the best product possible to equip our warfighters with the tools necessary to make them the most lethal fighting force in the world. My staff and I are available to answer any questions you may have. And again, thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. Feenstra, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers and Ranking Member Smith and the members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity for me to testify on behalf of my priority involving the 185th Air Refueling Wing in Sioux City, Iowa, known as the ARW. The 185th ARW and its frequently evolving mission over the years has served our nation with distinction since 1946. Originally a fighter wing, the unit transitioned in 2003 to take on the KC-135 Stratotanker air refueling mission. This shift significantly increased the operational wear and tear on the base and the runways. The KC-135 is roughly 250,000 pounds heavier than an F-16 fighter Falcon it replaced. It requires infrastructure that can accommodate its size and mission scope. Unfortunately, in the 2 decades since the transition, the 185th is still operating from the same runways designed for the lightweight jet aircraft. The Department of Defense initially pledged to replace the runway as part of its mission conversion when it was planned in the 1990s. But those plans were understandably put on hold after the aftermath of the 9/11 and the demands of the War on Terror. However, the promise has not yet materialized. It's why my staff and I are working to find funding in the fiscal year 2026 for the long overdue replacement of this runway, 13-31. I led a letter joined by the full Iowa delegation and from U.S. senators and representatives from South Dakota and Nebraska to Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth asking it for the inclusion in the FYDP. This project is a promise that should have been fulfilled 2 decades ago. I respectfully urge this subcommittee to prioritize funding for the 185th runway to be replaced in the FY 2026 budget. Thank you for your time on this commitment to our nation's defense. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Feenstra. And with that, I don't have any closing comments. Do you? Okay. We'll thank our colleagues for appearing before us today, and the committee stands adjourned.